next. Okay. Can you all hear me okay? I'm hoping
yes,
you can.
Very well, thank you.
I'm speaking to you. I'm joining you from Moscow, and this is a city where we're still reading from the cowardly assassination of the journalist Daria Dugina, who was killed in a targeted attack just a few days ago in a car bomb, which exploded in on the outskirts of Moscow, in an attack that has Russian intelligence services have said was carried out by Ukrainian forces, probably by the SBU. They've identified who they think was behind it, who has fled the country and is currently in Estonia. And the reaction here has been very different from the reaction certainly in Britain, where I've been following some of the media reaction and some of the reaction from so-called leftists as well, who just days before Daria was killed were lamenting the attack on Salman Rushdie, the author, in the United States, and they were saying how terrible this is, and they were using this attack to lobby for increased action and sanctions against Iran. And of course, these very same people, a lot of the very same people, were gloating over the death of Daria Dugina, implying that she deserved to die, peddling the tale that her father, Alexander Dugin, is a fascist. And I think in the Western press we saw this thing, calling him Putin's brain, which again, serves again. This is another element of the rampant Russophobia that we're seeing across the West, across the liberal mainstream media organizations, but also in I have to say some of the leftist organizations in Britain. But this should be something that's incredibly concerning to all of us, really, because it shows that Daria was somebody that had been into Mariupol. She'd been in Donbass and Azovstal, and she'd reported on what was happening there. And this is an attempt to silence all of those voices, and we're seeing this ratcheted up. But also it shows that the Ukrainian intelligence services are happy to hunt you down wherever you are. And we saw this with Anatoly Shary, the opposition politician, the Ukrainian opposition politician and opposition journalist, who was arrested in April this year in Spain, where he'd gone where he sought sanctuary in a joint operation in the European Union, a so-called place of sanctuary, and where he should have felt safe. And he was arrested in a joint operation with the Spanish police, and they were wanting to deport him to Kiev, where he would have faced almost certain execution. He was deemed to be a traitor. Now, the thing in common that Alexander Dugin, Daria Dugina, Anatoly Shary, people like Eva Bartlett, the Canadian journalist who has been producing some outstanding journalism from Donbass and exposing the war crimes there that have been committed, the use of petrol bombs. The hotel she was in was targeted. Actually, she had a very fortunate escape and the hotel that houses international journalists was again attacked yesterday. For the second time the hotel has been targeted. Now, this is of course a war crime. It's a war crime to target journalists. They have protection under the Geneva Convention, but all of these people that are speaking out are finding themselves on the Mirotvorets list, the peacemaker list. You may have heard of this. It was established back in 2014. Hundreds of thousands of people are on this list. The website that is hosted by NATO, by the way, and this is essentially a list that puts a cross on people's back. It is a target. People that appear on that list are targeted for execution. Now, we've seen very recently with Daria Dugina, there was also Andrea Rocelli, the Italian photojournalist who was killed by Ukrainian forces, who'd appeared on this list, and with a photograph of him crossed out, neutralized, written across it. Now, this is important, and the reason that I'm bringing this hit list up is that there is another list, a similar list, which I discovered and I wrote about in the Morning Star a few weeks ago, that is based in London, in West London, called Molfar. And this is a similar website to the Peacemakers website. And of course, they deny that it's a kill list. And of course, they deny that they advocate violence. But this is a list that, this is a website that is directly connected to the Ukrainian government. It is the head of PR used to work for the Foreign Office of the Ukrainian government. One of its main sponsors is one of the Ukrainian ministries. It is also linked to USAID, it's also works with Pinkerton, who I'm sure our guests from the US will know extremely well, but it's a notorious anti-working class organization with a history of attacking trade unionists, and again executing and killing trade unionists, in fact, many years ago. And it's doing the same kind of thing now. But the Molfar, you can look it up. I'll post a link into the chat afterwards. But this Molfar uses the exact same language that the Peacemakers kill list does. It talks about enemies of Ukraine will be punished. It publishes the names and addresses, the photographs and the details of people that it is deemed to be enemies, including children as well. I mean, it's absolutely sickening that this is operating from your country, from Britain. So this is an attempt to silence those that are speaking out. The Communist Party of Ukraine, as you know, was banned permanently this year. It's been completely outlawed. Its assets, its buildings, everything that it owns has been handed over to the Ukrainian state. News organizations have been banned. We know that political parties have been shut down. And of course, the Kononovich brothers are very much part of this story. And they were arrested. For people that don't know the history, they were detained in March, soon after the special military operation started in February. Now, they were disappeared. Nobody heard from them for months. And there was fears that they had been killed. We know that they were tortured. We know that they were threatened, and there was pressure put on them to accept a 10-year sentence, or otherwise they would face life in prison. The evidence against them is that there isn't any, essentially. It's incredibly flimsy. This is a Zelensky show trial. And they've appealed to MEPs, they've appealed to the Western press to attend their trials and to show the true nature of Ukraine. But of course, their calls have been ignored. There's been not a single MEP member of the European Parliament that has turned up. There's not been a single Western media outlet that has reported on them. And we expect it from those. We expect it from the imperialist powers. We expect it from MEPs. I mean, the European Union is at its heart an anti-communist organization. We know that. We've seen very recently or I think in 2019, the last time, a motion on totalitarianism, equating fascism and communism, which led to an orgy of anti-communism across the Baltic states, in Ukraine. And we've seen this week in Riga, communist monuments being torn down. We saw it across Ukraine. So they have fueled all of this. They have fueled the arrest of the Kononovich brothers. So to speak out for the Kononovich brothers would obviously remove the mask of the anti-communism at the heart of that neoliberal economic bloc. This is a regime that just this week, I don't know whether this has hit the European press or the American press or the Western press, but just earlier this week, the Zelensky government essentially criminalized humanitarian aid. It's passed a law that makes it a criminal offence. You'll be deemed to be a traitor if you receive humanitarian aid from Russia. And this is very significant because in Donbass, in Lugansk and Donetsk, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation this week sent its 100th humanitarian aid convoy. I think it left on the 15th from the Lenin State Farm, and I think 4 or 5 trucks loaded with tons and tons of humanitarian aid has been sent. And this is obviously incredibly important now with the situation unfolding there, and as Ukrainian forces are escalating their attacks on civilian populations. This is what's happening, with petrol bombs, with artillery shelling, not just the Zaporizhia nuclear power station as well. We should mention what's happening there and how they're using that. But now 15 years in prison for anybody that receives humanitarian aid. Of course, we've heard about with the trade union and the scrapping of collective bargaining rights for trade unionists, fueled again and supported by Britain, and we can guess as to why. Now, obviously, the Kononovich brothers know that people are supporting them, and they're very, very grateful. So any messages and any solidarity actions are being relayed back to them by their lawyers. And the trial it's a sham trial, it has to be said, and the hearings are taking place without them in the courtroom, but their lawyers are able to get some of these messages to them, and it gives them immense strength and an immense an immense uplift to hear that people haven't forgotten about them. But of course, the Kononovich brothers, as we know, are one part of an even bigger story, because there are thousands of people that are disappeared inside Ukraine. Thousands of people have been rounded up, tried as traitors. The left, I keep being told by liberal organizations in Britain, you should speak to some of the left. Well, one, I have spoken to the left, but two, where are they? They're either in prison, they've either been killed, or they're hiding in underground in fear of their lives. That's the reality inside Ukraine. I've been inside Ukraine, and I can tell exactly. I think, as Theo said in his introduction, that the people in those regions are welcoming Russian forces as liberators. They're saying to me that they're not afraid of the Russian forces that are bringing them water, bringing them food, and bringing them aid. That they're afraid of the Ukrainians. They're the people that have threatened them, that have the neo-Nazi forces that have destroyed their homes, that have held them as hostages. Now, just to come on to, I think I'm abusing my 7 minutes that I was allocated, but I think there's an important point to make, is what we do about it. Now, this is the crux of everything, as is always. Now, in Britain, class struggle is well and truly back on the agenda, largely thanks to Mick Lynch, and the RMT. But now we're seeing this convergence of forces and a huge kind of wave of strike action. The post workers, I believe, are going out on strike tomorrow, and health workers are set to join them. And there's this kind of critical mass that's building. Now you're coming into winter, and winter is going to be a very, very critical time. Inflation is rocketing through the roof. Energy prices are skyrocketing. People are really feeling, I think it's the cozy term that they give it, the cost of living crisis, or whatever fluffy name that they give it. But in reality, it's this is a class war. But we need to, I think, in my view, not only is to support the Kononovich brothers, but how best we can support the Kononovich brothers is by politicizing those strikes, by politicizing those demonstrations, the huge demonstrations that have been called, because we can't just keep doing more of the same. We can't just keep saying Britain demands better, or whatever the terrible, dreadful slogan that is proposed by the trade union bureaucracy is. We need to take our inspiration from countries like Italy and Greece, where they've had national strike action over pay, over conditions, but they've also made the link to the fact that their countries are two of the biggest supporters of the arms flowing into Ukraine, and they have raised it. They've taken strike action under the slogan "Lower your guns, raise our wages," and this is exactly the kind of proposition that we need to be taking into our trade union branches, and to make sure that we're passing resolutions that the slogans on those demonstrations are the same, that they're not separating those two things out, that they're not separating the amelioration of terms and conditions in Britain from what's happening in Ukraine and the increase in military spending. We've got two Tories now fighting to see who's going to become the next prime minister, and both of those are, as far as I can see, Rishi Sunak was the chancellor who financed, he gave the money that provided the arms into Ukraine. Liz Truss was posing on on tanks, and she was busy saying that she wasn't going to recognize the sovereignty of Rostov at one point, which was, you know, a bizarre moment. But these two people are going to continue that policy, as is Keir Starmer, it has to be said. So we need to be putting pressure on them. And we're talking about this 3% of GDP now. They're talking to be spent on military and arms. So we need to be saying no to militarization. We need to be saying no arms to Ukraine. And we also need to be saying scrap NATO as well. I mean, I think those are the three absolute critical demands. And this is the best way that we can, you know, that we can raise our solidarity with the Kononovich brothers, is by taking their struggle from inside the prison cells, inside Kiev's dungeons. And we need to be taking that onto the streets in Britain, in the United States, and across across Europe. And you know, we need to show that class, you know, the class struggle is global. It's not, you know, we're not, we don't work in isolation. This is why we've got speakers from Moscow. We've got speakers from, we've heard from inside Ukraine. We've heard from the United States. We've even heard from the Watford Gap. So, you know, I think, you know, that broad sense of unity is essential, but we absolutely must push those political demands, and we must fight for an end to arms an end to the you know, the Russians flood Ukraine with arms. There is an easy way out of this. There was a road to peace and there was a road to war, and you know, we have to recognize that it was NATO, it was the Western imperialist forces that refused to abide by Minsk I, that refused to abide by Minsk II, refused to abide by the agreements made in you know, in the early 90s, not 1 inch, not one more inch with NATO's expansion. So we must resist at all costs that, and we must politicize the struggle. Thank you.